Welcome to the Determined Truth Podcast.
Want the truth? You can't handle the truth.
Where we aim to explore questions of truth, the scriptures, and what it means for the church today. Here are your hosts, Rob Dalrymple and Vinnie Angelo.
Hey everyone, welcome in. We are beginning our pass-through, our overview of Philippians. So look at this. We're getting to the small letters, man. This is awesome. So, but make them good this time. That's... So I was reading your notes.
Oh, yeah? Oh, you hadn't read that before?
Yeah, no, for some reason I
had some thoughts. Hey, just for the listeners, just to know, Vinnie stuttered over the notes because it says, in parentheses, add some thoughts on Philippians, but make them good this time.
This time.
And apparently he still isn't able to do that.
No, we're going on 4 years of the podcast, and I'm still waiting to make some good notes on something. Some good thoughts on something.
Not good notes, good comments.
Good comments, whatever.
Come on. Your grammar's got to be gooder than that.
It's the goodest. So I had a professor in seminary, not you, and he said...
It's not as good.
Not as good.
We're never going to finish.
We're never going to finish.
Stop!
Because you and your idolatry of wanting to watch the football game. But this guy's thing was...
You had to go there.
If you got a letter from Paul, something was probably wrong. It was an exciting thing. There's obviously the exceptions. This would definitely be one of them. So like with Galatians, there's a problem there. There's a major issue. The Corinthians.
Thessalonians,
Yeah. But Philippians, like, this seems like a lovely congregation.
There is two women that Paul addresses in chapter 4, Euodia and Syntyche.
Sure,
hey, guys, get along. And they do have false teachers in chapter 3 that Paul's addressing. But yeah, overall, I think you're right. But what we want to realize is
there's
that
still always going to be
this
situations.
There's still issues there.
Okay.
Yeah, this is called the Epistle of Joy because he does have this great relationship with the church in Philippi. They sent him money. They sent him an Epaphroditus. So he's got this great relationship with them. And there are an issue that causes the letter to be written, so it is contextual there. But yeah, overall, you're correct.
Yeah. So for once in a row.
Gosh.
I know.
It's been so hard dragging you along.
Finally getting my money out of seminary, and that happened by just quoting a professor.
Get some of those stickers, the star stickers.
Call it like high school, high school footballers. So every time they get a tackle,
I would put on the screen every time we do a podcast. Hey, Vinnie, you got a sticker.
Here's a stick. It's like a pee chart. You didn't pee the bed. Here's a star in the fridge. You got to buy a toy.
You had to go there.
Nice, good times.
Where your mind goes is so interesting.
It's the most.
Anyways, but I digress.
I digressed, honestly.
Yeah.
But so when we looked at Ephesians in our last study, we went back to the book of Acts because Ephesians just doesn't pop up. And so we were able to look at Acts 19 and some instances there. How did this church come along? What do we know about Paul and the church in Philippi from the book of Acts?
Very important. According to the book of Acts, Paul really wanted to go to Ephesus. We discussed Ephesians. It was the center of really the European world, not outside of Rome. But according to the book of Acts, God forbids him to go there. We don't know why. So Paul's traveling from the eastern part of what we call Turkey to the western part, wants to go to Ephesus, which is on the western coast. And the Holy Spirit says, you can't go there. Maybe I'll travel north. Holy Spirit says, you can't go there either. And so he goes over to Troas, which is north of Ephesus on the coast. He has a vision of a man from Macedonia. This is Acts chapter 16, verse 9. And it says, come over here to Macedonia to help us. And Paul's like, oh, okay. Now, what's interesting is this is the first time we see in the book of Acts a we statement. And of course, that indicates that Luke has now joined the gang. So we don't have Paul and Silas, who very importantly are both Roman citizens. We also have a young man named Timothy, who apparently is on the journey with them. And then Luke, of course, joins them in the city of Troas. And the four of them travel over from Troas. They actually land in Neapolis, which is the city, the coastal region, and then travel inland just a few miles to Philippi.
Isn't that where the Colts play? Neapolis. No. Oh, this is Indianapolis.
No, that'll be Indy.
My bad. Sorry, dad joke. Continue on, sir.
What's really cool, by the way, Vinnie, is I don't think you've been to Greece.
No.
Yeah, it's actually a good trip. And I haven't been to the seven churches of Asia. I've been to Patmos, and I've been to Ephesus. I haven't been to seven churches of Asia or to Turkey. But I was fortunate enough to go to Greece. And there's actually a road from Neapolis up the hill to Philippi that dates to the first century, on which we were walking very likely on the road that Paul would have traveled on. So I kissed the ground. I did. Okay, maybe I didn't.
That's disgusting.
It sounds really cool. Yeah, because it was somebody else's footprints that was in my mouth. Okay, that's not Paul.
Nice.
Not that I would have known Paul's footprints in my mouth.
That tastes like a Pauline sandal. Sorry. It's going to be one of those shows. We looked at some background information on Ephesus itself, specifically trade and finance, and how obviously a lot of time on the Temple of Artemis. Are there any other background things we need to know about Philippi or even the recipient? What would their world have looked like, or does it look similar to the Ephesians?
No, it's very different. And so let's discuss that briefly. Philippi is a city in Macedonia, which is the northern part of Greece. I think today it's called North Macedonia or something like that. It's on the Via Egnatia, which is a road, all roads lead to Rome. So you have a road from the east of Greece, from, what's the city, modern day Istanbul, all the way through Philippi, all the way to the west coast of Greece. And then, of course, the ships would take you through the Adriatic Sea to Rome. It's on that major highway. It's a major Roman road. It's a Roman colony. Now, Roman colonies are very important to the story. A Roman colony means that all the citizens of Philippi, not everybody who lives in the city, but if you're a citizen of Philippi, you are a citizen of Rome. So this goes back about 100 years before Paul, in the year 42 BC or BCE. There's a famous battle in Philippi. This is where Brutus and Cassius are fighting against Mark Antony and Octavian, and Brutus and Cassius have killed Julius Caesar. Whose side are you going to be on? And of course, you want to be on the victorious side. Philippi was on the victorious side. They sided with Antony and Octavian. Octavian becomes the adopted son of Julius Caesar. He becomes the first Caesar or emperor of the Roman Empire. Because remember, Julius Caesar was head of the Republic. Now it becomes the empire. And he becomes known as Augustus or Caesar Augustus. And because Philippi helped Octavian and Antony, then Philippi was granted the status of a Roman colony. Now, a Roman colony means you get certain tax breaks. All your citizens are citizens of Rome as well, and there's certain taxes that Roman citizens didn't have to pay.
Yeah.
You get certain scruples of the Roman law, like you can't be crucified. You also can't be beaten without a trial. The law of due process is there for Roman citizens. All those things are important to the Paul story as well. And then, of course, it's also a place where some of the Roman generals were. What happened is the Roman generals would come home from battles, and Roman military officials would come home from battles. They don't want them all settling in Rome. You know, and Rome's not a place where the Roman leaders, yeah, it's really good to have a whole large number of military around me, because if my enemy or my opponent says, hey, I want to overthrow the Caesar, he's got the military that he can get on his side. You send the military to other places, and you give them land, which means you're stealing land from somebody else. And of course, that land that was given to them was in Philippi. So you have a lot of Romans, a lot of military presence there. It's a Roman city through and through. Certain tax advantages, of course. Paul was supported by this city, as we mentioned already, financially. It says in chapter 1, verse 5, from the first day until now. They sent Epaphroditus to care for him, which we'll talk about later as we survey chapters 2 and 3. And so Paul's writing to them, to this city that had a great city, cared for him greatly, and financially you always have your poor, you always have your peasants, but you have some upper middle class and some level of wealth. Hey, Vinnie, let's go ahead and read through the book of Acts, getting our context of the story, because I think there's some other important things about what happens in Acts that is going to help us understand Philippians. So let's go ahead and start in Acts 16, verse 12.
That's the middle of the sentence. Should we do 11?
Because that's fine. You can go 11 because it goes to Neapolis where the Colts play, and then it goes to Philippi. Yeah, that's right. And then let's stop at verse 18. We'll talk about that briefly, and then we'll keep on reading through the rest of the chapter.
We set sail from Troas and took a straight course to, I don't want to read this one, Samothrace. Is that how you pronounce it? Samothrace. The following...
Samothrace might be actually more correct, but we say Samothrace.
Sure. You know what's funny is in Greek, it's easier to read these words than the English the transliteration.
That's why Samothrace is probably more correct. Yeah.
And the following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is a leading city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony.
There you go.
We remained in the city for some days. On the Sabbath day, we went outside the gate by the river where we supposed there was a place of prayer, and we sat down and spoke to the woman who had gathered there. A certain woman named Lydia, a worshiper of God, was listening to us. She was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer in purple cloth. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. When she and her household were baptized, she urged us, saying, if you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home. And she prevailed upon us.
Okay, thank you very much. So first off, notice there was no synagogue. So Paul on the Sabbath day went to go find the synagogue. There wasn't one. So if there are any Jews, you have to have 10 men for a quorum to have a synagogue. So obviously there wasn't 10 Jewish men in the city.
Because we would have said, would we assume, and this is argument from silence, there would be a synagogue if there was 10 men. This isn't them deciding if they wanted to have it or not. They would have this if there was enough.
Yeah, they would have, because it's ethnic and religious and all that. They wouldn't have betrayed their ancestry there. Yeah, so he goes to the river because if there are any Jews in the area, they would congregate by a river because ceremonial washings, we call them mikvahs, but ceremonial washings that can happen by a body of water, especially a river where it's just flowing because it's living water, because it's moving, are very important for purification and for cleansing. So that's where they would congregate. Sure enough, They found some women who had assembled there, which means whether there was any men there or not is not stated. And then there's a woman named Lydia. She's actually really important. By the way, she's apparently the first convert in what we call Europe. And Lydia actually wasn't from the city. She's from Thyatira. And she's a seller of purple fabrics, which means she deals with the elite. You don't sell purple fabrics to the average person in town. You sell purple fabrics to the wealthy in town. So she's working at the Saks Fifth Avenue, not the Kmart. Do they still have Kmart?
No, I think it's done.
Oh, for those of you that were back in the day,
Blue light special.
Kmart, oh, that was so great. We used to follow that around. Where, Nana? Where's it going? Anyways, I digress.
Again.
Exactly. Anyway, so she's a seller of purple fabrics, and she's a worshiper of God. She was listening, and the Lord opened her heart to respond to things spoken by Paul. She and her household, which means she's got servants, children.
It almost makes it sound like she's
wealthy.
the manager of the household.
Exactly. And notice what she says in verse 15. If you've judged me to be faithful, come and stay in my house. Okay, hospitality was really important in the day because you got to stay in someone's house with somebody. Otherwise, you're going to be staying somewhere that's probably not going to be very safe for you. So hospitality is very important. But notice that female inviting the male, and it was a group of male because it's Paul, Silas, Timothy, and Luke, to stay at her house, which means she has a big enough house to house them all. And in fact, we find out that the church actually met in her home. So she's wealthy, which is evidenced by the fact of what she's selling and the market that she works in, as well as the fact that she has a household and the issue of her household being baptized. Were there infants there? We'll discuss that again. We can even discuss that at the end of chapter 16. All right, but they're going to the place of prayer. There's a slave girl. She has a demonic spirit, and she's making her servants money. Let's go ahead and continue that part of the story there. And let's pick it up in verse 16 then, where we left off, and let's go through verse 24.
Okay. One day as we were going to the place of prayer, we met a slave girl who had a spirit of divination and brought her owners a great deal of money by fortune-telling. While she followed Paul and us, she would cry out, "These men are slaves of the Most High God, who proclaim to you a way of salvation." She kept doing this for many days. But Paul, very much annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, "I order you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." And it came out of her that very hour. But when her owners saw that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the authorities. When they had brought them before the magistrates, they said, "These men are disturbing our city. They are Jews and are advocating customs that are not lawful for us as Romans to adopt or observe." The crowd joined in attacking them, and the magistrates had them stripped of their clothing and ordered them to be beaten with rods. After they had given them a severe flogging, they threw them into prison and ordered the jailer to keep them securely. Following these instructions, he put them in the innermost cell and fastened their feet in the stockings.
In the stockings, interesting.
Oh, in the stocks. I'm sorry. In the stock. Yeah, and nice little. They were pretty brutal with them, but then they gave them nice little slippers.
They were red socks.
Oh, ouch! The ugliest of the socks.
Cover the blood.
Yes.
We digress. We won't get into all the details of the story, but Paul and Silas are thrown in prison and because they cast a demonic spirit out of a girl who was making their owners some money. And, hey, wait a second. And the assumption has got to be they're Jews. These men being Jews, that means they're not Roman citizens. But nobody asked.
Nope, they assumed.
And they're doing these things that are not lawful for us Romans to do. We know that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens. So the crowd rose up, and guess what they did? They beat them naked. When you beat somebody naked, it's the whole idea is to shame them, expose them and shame them. And it's a severe beating. They're beaten with rods. It's the lictor's rods, the policeman's rods. It's intense. These guys are suffering. Not only that, but they throw them in the stocks. And what stocks are, I'm not sure if you're aware of any, you might be, but I know you've taught a lot. But stocks are basically to fasten your legs, and they keep your legs a certain distance apart. And that means your legs don't actually get to relax. And when the muscles don't relax, they become even more painful during the course of the night. So not only do they have beatings and wounds all over their body, and are they in pain from that, and they're in filthy conditions in the prison, but now they're in the stocks, even more suffering. And our first question is, why didn't Paul and Silas say, "Hey guys, that's not legal. We're Roman citizens"?
Hey everyone, we want to thank you for joining us on today's podcast. And we want to remind you that everything we provide at Determined Truth is free of charge. And this even includes all of the teaching that Rob, Danny, and myself do on a weekly basis in our online Bible studies, live streams, and our coaching for pastors in India and around the world. We don't have any supporters who get special behind-the-scenes access, but we can only do this with the generous support from those of you who can afford to give. So if you'd prayerfully consider supporting us with a fully tax-deductible donation, with anything from $5 a month or more, we will continue to challenge the church to be the church. To give, go to determinetruth.com and click on the Give tab, or find the link in today's show notes. Thanks.
They don't say anything. They allow this to occur. Now, that's an important setting, apparently, or very likely for the book of Philippians, because Paul is going to actually leverage this injustice that's done against them to the advantage of the Christians in Philippi. He's going to be escorted out of the city, him and Silas, but the rest of the church is going to actually be benefited from what Paul and Silas did. I think you know the story, but let's go ahead and continue reading. 25 through 34.
About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly there was an earthquake, so violent that the foundations of the prison were shaken. And immediately all the doors were opened and everyone's chains were unfastened. When the jailer woke up and saw the prison doors wide open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, since he supposed that the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted in a loud voice, "Do not harm yourself, for we are all here." The jailer called for lights and rushed in. He fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them outside and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They answered, "Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and you will be saved, you and your household." They spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. At the same hour of the night, he took them and washed their wounds. Then he and his entire family were baptized without delay. He brought them up into the house and set food before them. And he and his entire household rejoiced that he had become a believer in God.
So this famous story, Paul and Silas, of course, are still in the prison. For some reason, the rest of the prisoners have listened to Paul and Silas. That appears to be what's happened. The jailer, because the earthquake releases their chains and they're going to run out, and they don't run out. The jailer, his job, by the way, was to bring all the prisoners before trial the next day. Prisons were not meant to house people for long periods of time as a source of punishment. It was to house people until their trial. Of course, you could leave them there and just delay the trial, and that's a form of punishment. But nonetheless, the jailer's job, it wasn't necessarily to watch the prison. He could go home. But when there's an earthquake, he assumes everyone has left. Paul, hey, we're still here. Don't commit suicide. The jailer and his household become followers of Christ, of course. It's interesting that believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved, you and your household.
Yep.
There's two things that are interesting about that. One would be some churches say that you have to believe and be baptized, and Paul doesn't say anything about being baptized here, which is interesting in and of itself. And then, of course, the other question that we've discussed before is, does household include infants or not? And it's because the whole household was baptized or whatever, and that debate. I think
With this as well, just quickly, he asks the question, how we read this such in an evangelical way.
Yeah.
Sirs, what must I do to be saved? He's asking, think about it, he's about to die because he's lost all these prisoners. And his first concern is, how can I go be with Jesus when I die? Like he's asking an evangelical Billy Graham type question. No, what must I do to be saved, like from dying as a consequence for losing all these prisoners? That's more of the question he's asking. Yeah. And they actually bring it around to something else. Oh, let me tell you actually about what you need to be saved. But he's not asking this 20th century, how do I not go to hell question. So anyway.
Yeah. That's a good point. Very good point. Excellent. So no problem. They set food before Paul and Silas. Everything's all good and what have you. Then let's go to verse 35 now. 35 through 40, and this sets up the book of Philippians here, 35 through 40.
It's funny, I feel like we're back in the book of Acts. It's 2.5 years ago now.
Maybe we are.
Maybe we are. We hopped in the DeLorean, we went back to the future. When morning came, the magistrate sent the police, saying, "Let those men go." And the jailer reported the message to Paul, saying, "The magistrate sent word to let you go. Therefore, come out now and go in peace." But Paul replied, "They have beaten us in public, uncondemned men who are Roman citizens, and have thrown us into prison. And now are they going to discharge us in secret? Certainly not. Let them come and take us out themselves." The police reported these words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Roman citizens. So they came and apologized to them, and they took them out and asked them to leave the city. After leaving the prison, they went to Lydia's home, and when they had seen and encouraged the brothers and sisters there, they departed.
Okay, so there you go. Lydia's home's clearly the church. And so now, hey, wait a minute. You beat us publicly without a trial, men who are Romans. You assume that because we're Jews, we are not Roman citizens. And then you threw us into prison, and now you're going to send us away secretly. So Paul leverages this privilege that he has because I got something on you. Because here's the deal. If he reports them, I'm a Roman citizen. In other words, I'm not a citizen of Philippi. I'm a citizen of Rome. And what you just did was a crime against Rome. It's an act of war against Rome. And do you want Rome to come in and punish you? Because you're a colony. And as a colony of Rome, you get all the tax breaks. You get the military protection from Rome. Someone invades you, the Roman military will come in. It's like being a member of NATO, so to speak, perhaps, or something like that. Bricks. So Paul has something that he can leverage, but notice he still has to leave town. His presence is not going to work. He's got to leave town, which is interesting in and of itself. But they go to Lydia's house. Obviously, the church was congregated there. And he encourages everyone and he departs. And so it might be that because of what happens to Paul and Silas, the idea, by the way, when you get escorted out of town by the leading citizens, that makes you a person of honor, right? Because they're escorting you out of town. You must be somebody. And if Lydia goes, oh yeah, we're with Paul and Paul's somebody, and with Silas, they're somebody, that means the church has a measure of respect in the city.
Interesting.
And that means there's protections on the church. And that might be why there wasn't so many problems in Philippi, because they had political clout with the leadership of the community. And it seems like Paul leverages this because, of course, in Acts 20 and 21 and following, he doesn't allow himself to be beaten when he's in Jerusalem. He says, hey, I'm a Roman citizen, before they beat him. But on this occasion, Paul goes ahead and says, no, go ahead and beat us and we'll tell you later, which is amazing, by the way, just to think, hey, they're about to strip you naked and beat you with lictors rods. And you're like, the Lord's like, hey, let it happen. You're like, no, I'm okay, Lord. I'm going to tell him. No, don't tell him. Don't pull out your wallet, Paul. Don't pull that wallet. By the way, they wouldn't have had a wallet, but what would have happened, just for the sake of the listeners, since I brought it up, what would have happened is if you claim Roman citizenship and you aren't, it's punishable by death.
Oh, okay.
So the way, if they actually want to verify, are you a Roman citizen, Paul probably would have had records in his birth city or in the city in which he became a citizen. He said he was born one. So he would have stayed here detained. Probably not in a bad situation, because if he is a Roman citizen, they're not going to put him in the stocks and stuff like that. Until somebody gets to Tarsus to find his records. Yep, he sure is. And let him go. So it would have been one of those things. So you're just simply not going to make that up, because if it's found out that you're not, then it's death. It's capital punishment.
Yeah.
So this anyways becomes the background, I think, for Philippians, if that helps a lot.
That's great. So we talked about how Galatians has opponents. It's the Jewish Christians who are Judaizing, is what we've talked about. In Ephesus, we have more of the argument from silence on who the opponents are, but there's definitely unity issues that were going on. Who are the opponents that Paul's addressing in the Philippian letter?
Before I even discuss that video, one of the things I wanted to mention at the beginning of the episode was, hey, we really want to encourage you guys to be reading the book of Philippians now for the next several weeks while we go through this episode. It's only got 4 chapters. Read a chapter a day. Go through the entire book in a week. And then start over again as well. Look in different translations. Find good verses or passages that you want to meditate on. Philippians has got some great stuff. 2:5 through 11, if not 2:1 through 11.
Best
you need to memorize
section of the Bible,
Yeah. And then chapter 3, I consider it all rubbish compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom sake I forsaken all things. You've got some great stuff in Philippians, right? Chapter 4, I'm just going to go on and on. So meditate on those passages, but you might also go to the Bible Project videos and watch the video on Philippians to learn more about that. I don't know that they have a video on prisons. I know they're getting more things like that out, but those will all be good backgrounds. Just take the next several weeks as you're listening to this episode and really meditate upon the book of Philippians day and night. I think you'll be much rewarded for that. But as far as the opponents are concerned, there were some problems, as we alluded to earlier. There were some Jewish Christians that were still saying you got to be circumcised issue, but it doesn't appear to be a major issue that Paul addresses, like in the book of Galatians, and even Ephesians was still an issue there. But he does address it in chapter 3. He does address brothers who preach the gospel with impure motives, but we don't know what that is. And again, the fact that we don't know what it is says 2 things. One, they did know, so he doesn't need to address it. And the fact that Paul doesn't respond like, hey, here's how you need to address them, means either they knew how to address them or it wasn't a major issue, something like that. So we have a group of legalists of chapter 3. We have enemies of the cross. We don't know what that means. Again, we could discuss it anyways. And then there are some who objected to Paul's working among the Gentiles, but none of these become central. I think their major concern was Paul was writing from prison and they were concerned about him. And this isn't good. How can you be doing the work of the kingdom when you're in jail? And that's what I think we'll continue to address as we move forward.
So let's talk about prison, since you brought that up, and we've already highlighted a little bit in the book of Acts. But since he's writing from one, we also have, I mean, we refer to this as one of the prison epistles, right?
Yeah.
Along with 2 Timothy. Colossians, is that a prison epistle? I forget.
So the prison epistles are Philippians, Ephesians, Colossians, and Philemon.
Yeah, those, okay.
2 Timothy was also written from prison, but not this same imprisonment.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's a little disputed, but for the most part, it's not disputed. The prison epistles, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. And then 2 Timothy was written apparently from a different imprisonment.
For Philippians, which prison was he in, since he was prisoned multiple times?
Yeah, that's the question. It's generally thought that he's in a prison in Rome. The prison epistles were written from Rome. It's generally believed that the letter to Philippi up in Macedonia, and then you have letters to Colossians and Philemon probably being delivered at the same time. And you're going to go through Ephesus, so we'll deliver Ephesians, Colossians, and Philemon there, and then Philippians up north. If that's the case, and we're in the book of Acts, then we're in Acts chapter 28, where Paul finishes up in his imprisonment in Caesarea and travels to Rome. Others have said, no, we think actually he's in prison, maybe even in Ephesus, because there's some things in Ephesus that seem to indicate that maybe, which is interesting because he writes a letter to the church in Ephesus. Yeah. But if he is in prison in Ephesus, it would make sense. Paul does say that he faced wild beasts in Ephesus. Obviously, it's a figure of speech because he's a Roman citizen. You can't face wild beasts. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Vinnie, that N.T. Wright and a few others would actually say that he's maybe in prison in Ephesus. It's just one of those questions. Does he get out of the Roman imprisonment or does he not get out of the Roman imprisonment? If you only have one Roman imprisonment, then 2 Timothy is definitely it. And it's not the same situation as what's happening in these letters. So that's kind of the idea.
Okay.
So
when we read through Acts 16, you gave some background on what a prison looked like. That obviously was the prison in Philippi. Are all Roman prisons going to look the same, or what are some other details of the prison, the context of the prison that might just be helpful to so we could visualize this happening?
All imprisonments were not the same, but maybe all prisons would be similar. And again, they're all going to be different. If you build a prison in North Dakota and you build a prison, it's a state prison, they're going to build it differently than the prison in Louisiana.
Even the prisons in California. You've been to multiple prisons. We've both visited prisons. They look different. As a visitor, we have visited prisons, and even those ones look different.
Yeah, I really didn't do anything. It was wrongfully imprisoned. I didn't do anything.
I'm innocent, man.
Yeah, we joke, but we shouldn't actually on that, something like that, by the way. But yeah, because remember, Paul is going to have what appears to be a house imprisonment, and if that is in Rome, because he does say in that book of Acts, he stayed at his own rented apartment for a couple of weeks, because he's not he's awaiting a trial before Nero, and it's a rented house because he's just simply not an escape threat. He's not being punished or anything like that at all. He simply has appealed to Caesar. He's probably got a letter from Herod saying he's innocent and not a concern. But in Roman prisons, by the way, as I said before, they were meant just to hold you in custody until you appear before a trial. But of course, you could be there. If you are convicted, you could be staying there until you await sentencing, which is usually death or something like that. It could be exile or banishment. Very rarely is it a prolonged imprisonment. That would only be, we want you to suffer, so we're just going to leave you there until we decide what the sentence is going to be.
It almost sounds similar, it's not the same, but similar to the difference between our jails and prisons, because that's the way jails work in America. That's something that you're housed until you await trial, and then you could be sentenced to jail, I believe, if your sentence is under a year. If it's over a year, that's when you would go to a prison. So, but obviously it's a different context, but jails and prisons are not the same thing. So this is one of those things. The jail is the temporary thing. It's not the same as, we might even say, he's going to jail for 20 years. No, you go to prison for 20 years. Jail is the intermediary type thing.
But they only have one. Jail prisons are the same for them. But what you're saying is correct. They don't go to prison as a punishment. Yeah. They stay in jail until they get sentenced.
Yes,
exactly. Yeah. Now, there were sometimes, of course, that prisons were the place of execution. If that's the case, what's interesting is they were most often done by strangulation. Duration of the imprisonment would be just the decision of the magistrate to decide how long he wants you to stay there. But sometimes the magistrate wouldn't want to make the decision. And the magistrate's tenure as the magistrate could be a 1 or 2 year term. And so the next magistrate comes in. We see this in the book of Acts when Paul's in prison in Caesarea. The next person comes into power and says, what do you want to do with these prisoners that were here from the last regime? Oftentimes, they'll actually be released because the new magistrate wants to make friends in the city. And so he's going to release them there. So it's actually really interesting because it brings up the issue of mass incarceration, which I'm actually lecturing on at the university today. I did this morning. I'm lecturing on it again this evening because they didn't incarcerate people for long periods of time. They didn't have mass incarcerations. And we have this notion that the only way to handle these people is to lock them up and put them away. No, they found ways to let them be contributors to society. Because again, in the Roman world, which is true in ours, who's going to feed you? And so the burden of maintaining the prison system, which is at least a building, a facility, and of course paying for the guards, which are usually some kind of soldiers or imperial forces there as well. But prisons were not good places. And people in prisons, if they were there for whatever reasons, it was usually a lot of low-class felons.
Okay.
And most significantly, they don't feed you.
Yeah. This is the point in Matthew 25. I was in prison and you brought me food.
Exactly.
Or you fed me.
Exactly. That's right. In 2 Timothy, Paul's in a prison. He knows he's about to die. He's apparently has already had his trial. He's already been accused. We typically date 2 Timothy to 64, 65 AD. Rome burns down in 64. Paul is probably arrested in late 64. He says in Timothy, hey, bring my cloak. He doesn't have his jacket with him. It's probably still the summer months. And he says, come quickly. And we often say Paul dies anywhere from 64 or 65 to 68 because Nero is the emperor until 68. We know he dies during the reign of Nero. There's no way he would have stayed in prison for 3 or 4 years. If Nero has convicted him for burning Rome down, the longer you let this guy stay in prison, it looks like he's innocent. Carry out the punishment. And the punishment is death by execution. So he probably died very likely at the end of 64 or early 65, along with Peter. The thing about that was, we're not going to feed you. The problem that you're here. So obviously, low-level criminals would just hope that people visit them. But if you visit a prisoner, you can be considered an accomplice to his crime. So if it's a crime that's against Rome or something like that, it's not just a sympathetic mother or sympathetic friend or wife or spouse. So anybody visiting Paul in prison for a later charge, like doing something against the city or something against the empire or whatever, it's actually a pretty tough thing to do. I'm not sure I want to go there, Paul. But nonetheless, so citizenship gave Paul several privileges, and that privileges would include he can't be bound, he can't be flogged without a trial, they can't kill him unless he actually committed a murder. And of course, crucifixion was simply out of the question for Roman citizens there. And the prisons were filthy, rats, very dark, very dungeony. Only natural light would come in, but it's probably up high where the windows might be, where you can't actually access them. Lots of rats, a lot of infestation, a lot of filth, a lot of really bad people. Yeah, just not a place that you want to be there. And if they did bring food in, it would be one time a day. And if the Christians brought food, they would bring food probably for everybody because that's the only way that they're going to get food in there. If you have any wealth or status or power, you're not going to go there because what's going to happen is you're going to pay off the magistrate to say, hey, here's the deal, dude.
Yeah.
We're friends. And it's just that wealth. Just think of elite wealth, where in our system is more concerned with truth and justice a little bit. The elite wealthy can still get the best lawyers and make sure that they get out for a little while. That was even more so in that day of honor and shame there. Yeah.
Okay. So if we were to just sum up why Paul is going to be writing to the Philippians, there's going to be it's probably going to be multifaceted. There's theological things that are happening. In Galatians, we use the term agitators or Judaizers, depending on what decade you read a commentary about Galatians. But there's going to be some theological issues that are happening regarding Christianity and how Gentiles can follow the Jewish Messiah. So that's going to be one of the issues. It's a dark place to live secularly because it's not going to be open to Christianity in a sense, and any religion that's going to disrupt the normal Roman flow of life, that's going to be seen as hostile. And so it's going to be dark. And we have to assume Paul received imprisonment and beating for preaching Jesus. There's probably a lot of other people that we don't know about that the same thing happened as well. And so there's the people that we don't know that they're dealing with the same thing. They're going to be imprisoned. They're going to be receiving physical issues. It's just not one issue. It's not just an internal church issue. They need this kind of encouragement because they're probably receiving issues from outside and from culture as well.
Yeah, although I think actually it's a little bit more limited here in Philippians because remember, Lydia is a person of prominence. She's wealthy. And she's providing purple garments to the elite people in town, the kings, the royalty. So because of that.
So there's a little bit of a quid pro quo.
Absolutely. So and I think that's why this is the Epistle of Joy, is because they didn't have as much opposition from the Roman culture because of Lydia's status.
What is probably not doing is, we're not saying that she was buying them off and therefore had this. She was a seller of purple silk prior to her conversion. She just continued doing what she was doing. But since she had the status, she was able to probably utilize that.
And because Paul and Silas were escorted out of the city, they actually are the revered teachers, unlike in Corinth, where Paul's, I'm not dressing up my speech. I'm not going to make them laugh. I'm not going to wear nice clothes. I'm going to work in the leather shop. I'm a day laborer, take it or leave
Yeah.
it, but I'm preaching Jesus Christ crucified. None of that is in play here in Philippians because they're actually respected in the culture. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah. So to add to that would be they were concerned about Paul's circumstances in prison. Are you okay? What's going on? They were the agitators that you discussed there. There may have been some instances of difficulties overall. They had sent Epaphroditus to care for Paul, and he became sick. And they're like, hey, Paul, we want quid pro quo. We sent Epaphroditus from you. Would you send Timothy to us?
Yeah.
And Paul said, I can't because I need him here. And so when Epaphroditus shows up with a letter, we didn't want to see you. We thought sending you would force Paul's hand to send Timothy to help us.
Is that part of the patronage mentality that works? We talked about that with Dr. Warren Carter a couple of years ago now, but it's that idea like I do this and now you're in debt and you would return the favor.
Yeah, the debt obligation system, absolutely, exactly.
Okay.
So when Epaphroditus shows up with a letter, don't be angry with me. Here's what happened. I got sick and almost died, and Paul wanted to send me back. And Paul explains, and I need Timothy right now. That's what's going on there. And then, of course, this great exhortation that, hey, I'm in prison, and it's okay. It's actually working out great. And I think that one of the key verses in Philippians is Philippians 1:27, to live a life worthy of the gospel. What a statement, by the way, to live a life worthy of the gospel. So I think that's some of the key things that are going on behind the book of Philippians.
So what are, in the midst of suffering, like you said, being co-laborers with the gospel, even join the midst of suffering, which means it's going to happen from an outside source. These are the things that we would want to look through in Philippians. And even one of the things that I always look for as well is the context. Paul is writing these things not from a place of privilege, but that's why it's important to know that he is writing these things from a jail cell. And if he could encourage us in that instance, he's not just doing it when the times are easy.
Yeah, and I think we'll discuss that in more detail next week because I think we can abuse that, but I think you're exactly right what you're saying. There, he's like, hey, look, things have worked out really well for me here in prison, and here's my exhortation to you as well. Absolutely. Yeah. Very good.
Which also makes us rethink things like, is it 4:4? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
4:13.
4:13.
Yeah.
And it's, hey, Steph Curry, glad you put that on your shoes. That's awesome.
Oh, did he?
Oh, yeah. That's part of his branding.
So he's going to heaven then.
Because he's going to heaven. But that's probably not what Paul's talking about, is that, hey, I can
shoot all threes because Christ Jesus strengthens me.
Because how many
That's his secret recipe.
It is. That's what they call him, Chef Curry.
You know what? I'm going to quit this podcast. I'm going to go on the PGA Tour.
Right?
It'll be the senior PGA Tour now. I'm a little older. Because I can do all things through Christ Jesus who strengthens me.
Yes. So that's probably not what Paul is referencing in that passage. So if this is your favorite Bible verse, if you have it stenciled on the wall, if you have it as a license plate frame, you got to ask, am I abusing that passage? Is that what he's talking about? Or what's the context of, and we'll get to that, but why would Paul even write that? And you got to start with the context of where is he writing from? So do you think he's really writing the Philippians a letter from prison just to say, and you could follow your dreams too?
Wow, that's so much of the Western church. Though,
100%. Yeah.
It's so tragic. It's just, whoa.
Yes.
All right. Hey, great.
Hey,
look at that. I'm almost out of water.
Oh, man, you're going to have to go. You should sit down. It's hot in Arizona. You should sit down for a little bit. Maybe kick the feet up, eat a long lunch.
Good idea. I wonder if there's something I can watch on
It's the middle of the afternoon. Maybe there's something in Europe that's on that will play right now.
Oh, because it's evening in Europe.
It's evening over there.
I'll see. Maybe there's a good football game on.
Football. My father-in-law would tell me, I don't understand why you Americans call the football. It's you don't kick your foot, you run, you throw it. We have the football in the Portugal. So that's a terrible Portuguese accent, but that's what my father-in-law has told me.
It's a good thing it's actually your father-in-law because otherwise people would really be angry right now. Vinnie, just put down all of Europe.
No, it's my Portuguese father-in-law has been telling me that for. Exactly. I don't know what you guys do with the foot, but it's not the football. It's stupid.
He's totally right, by the way. Right. We do kick it. Yeah. It's only worth 1 point when we kick it, or we kick it and the other team gets possession of it. Exactly. If you kick it, you're giving up possessions.
Exactly.
Hey, thanks so much, man.
All right, everyone. We'll catch you guys next week. I want to thank you for joining us on today's podcast, and we would love for you to share the work of Determined Truth with others. Please follow this podcast and give a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Your review will go a long way towards helping others find this podcast. Then, share it with others so that we can get the word of the gospel of the kingdom to more people.